Hey, Mitch.
Hey, Andrew, what's up? Fancy meeting you here.
Yeah, good to see you.
It's hot outside, man.
It's odd that we're doing this on a bus.
That's right.
Tonight's episode live from a bus.
That's right. And if you hear any rumbling outside, that's the wheels on the bus going round and round.
Yeah.
The wipers swish. Can you tell we have toddlers?
That's right. We're both busting to toddler song. Today is the 13th year anniversary of Katrina.
Today?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It is, yes.
Oh, and there's our guest.
Oh my God! Surprise interest. There's Kathleen. Shh! Don't let anybody know that she's here yet.
Okay.
It's also our 30th episode.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
didn't even realize
it's
that.
Anniversaries all over the place. I actually remember the morning after Katrina, watching on TV the footage of the levees like just starting to break,
right.
And like this little trickle of water coming out of that, and getting this sort of deep dread feeling. And now like I'm reliving that moment right now, so Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, you're welcome. Another happy anniversary in emergency management. We really need some better anniversaries to mark this discipline.
That's right. We never have any happy anniversaries.
It's always horrible.
We only celebrate terrible human tragedies.
13 years ago.
We should come up with that. What's a happy thing we could celebrate?
The invention of ICS.
We could have Stafford Act Day.
That's true.
Happy Stafford Act Day.
Yeah, that's a good
Emergency
one.
managers.
James Lee Witt's birthday.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Good one.
Happy birthday, James Lee. Oh my God. That would be great, though.
So we got a great show today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very excited about this. Let me just jump into the intro. So Kathleen Tierney is a professor emerita in the Department of Sociology and research professor at the Institute of Behavioral Science at the University of Colorado, Boulder. From 2003 to 2017, she was the director of the university's Natural Hazard Center, which is probably the coolest organization ever to exist within the discipline of emergency management, I would say.
That is true. And we have the current director on our show a little while ago, and I just want to know, Kathleen, do you have a feud? Is there like a Lori Peek, Kathleen Tierney feud? Because Lori's a little of a thug. You know, I just want to.
Yeah, we want all the Lori Peek dirt on this podcast.
Well,
she's probably
you don't have to tell us right
now.
now.
She's stunned with silence because of
Okay, so she's my love child.
That's what we like on this show.
That's great.
Evidence-based testimony.
So let me just, mention some of the
I've never said that before, but she is.
Well, it's on the record now. So Kathleen has done some amazing research on the impact of disasters on business, disaster vulnerability, disaster resilience, conceptualization and measurement, the political economy of disasters. She's written a ton of books. Her next one is Disasters, Sociological Aspects, and that'll be published next year by Polity Press. So, Dr. Tierney, welcome and thank you for being on.
Well, it's actually my pleasure. I actually have never been in the presence of royalty before, so this is tremendous honor for me. What can I say?
We're Americans here. We don't believe in royalty.
That's right.
I just want to.
Well, you're dukes, aren't you?
Oh yeah, that's
Good
right.
point.
She got us on the
Very,
title.
yes,
Oh,
that
God.
is technically true.
Can I just ask you before we get started? Do you know James Lee Witt personally?
I wouldn't say that I know him well, but I have met him on a number of occasions, yes.
All right, we have this, all the former FEMA directors we really have a fanboy relationship with, except maybe Michael Brown. Too far?
What's the matter with Michael? Come on.
Oh,
Yeah.
speaking of dirt.
I know. Well, I guess we'll find out as we go through the episode. We wanted to frame this around your book, your 2014 book, The Social Roots of Risk, which is a great read for anybody that hasn't read it and incredibly relevant to a lot of stuff that's going on. And I guess I just want to start with a big question, if I could, which is maybe what does that mean? Okay, I learned at emergency management school that hurricanes kill people. right? Or that mass casualty, people with guns kill people, radiological incidents kill people. What does it mean to say that risk is social?
Well, I think that, back in the day when disaster research first started, that was the general paradigm that, events originate out of the physical system, out of the earth system, out of the atmospheric system, and they have an effect on the social system. That was old days thinking. Now the field is moving much more in the direction of saying that the origins of disaster are within the social system itself. That is, as Dennis Milletti said in his 1999 book, Disasters by Design, societies and the global system actually create the risks that are there waiting for that physical trigger, whether it's an earthquake or a hurricane or a tornado, to happen. So the blame is on us, actually. The blame is on society for the choices that we make about where we decide to build, what we decide to do in the way of protecting ourselves against hazards, whether or not we are thinking about adapting to climate change. All of these things are decisions that are made or not made by societies and communities.
In your book, you also do this kind of power analysis. You connect risk in particular to political and social sort of power and the controlling interests that sort of create risk as part of their profit making. Can you say a little bit about this connection between risk and power?
Oh, absolutely. And that's sort of at the base of my 2014 book, and even more so in the book that's coming out next year. The idea is to put a political economy lens on the social production of disasters, to think about how political and economic actors, while they're pursuing their own interests, are doing things that put us more at risk. Whether we're talking about real estate and development interests that pressure local governments to be able to develop in hazardous areas, whether we're talking about elites that fight regulations like building codes, all of these things come together to produce a situation in which we're much more at risk than we really should be.
What I love about this too is that it infuses society with emergency preparedness and resiliency and mitigation. It doesn't relegate it to just an emergency management agency, a fire department, a police department. It says, hey, real estate, you're also here, can help us be more prepared. Hey, banking and finance system, you have a role to play here. It gets us out of our emergency management agencies and into other organizations, which is pretty brilliant.
Well, yes, indeed. If only these economic and political actors would do this,
Right.
But they don't. And so the issue here is that the emergency management community is there to clean up the mess that is created by elite decision makers. And, they really got a good thing going. They've got a cool thing going because they can engage in speculative research, speculative development in hazardous areas. They sell, they get out, and then when disaster happens, the federal government picks up the tab. So it's a very good deal for these political and economic elites. Also, there's this thing among related to politicians and political actors this idea, not in my term of office, right? I don't have to do anything because the disaster is going to happen somewhere down the road, and I'm not going to be in office anymore. I'm not accountable. So, again, let the taxpayers of the United States pick up the bill for this risky behavior on the part of political and economic elites that profit by allowing and conducting development in hazardous areas.
I'm starting to feel a new purpose for the emergency management field. It may be that one key reason the emergency management field exists is just to get fired after these disasters, so that there'll be someone to blame except for not the politicians, right?
Yeah.
Which leads maybe to your defense of Michael Brown, right? It's like what can emergency management in this telling is a little bit kind of designed to fail, right? Because it's working against the structures of society.
And you're there to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of these scenarios are very, very big messes.
Hold in the bag.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, guys, Mitch and Andrew, don't forget that Michael Brown was in the position that he was in at the time that the Department of Homeland Security reorganization was taking place and coming down on FEMA like a ton of bricks.
And that is
yeah.
Let me take that segue because, I first was introduced to your work right after Katrina. And at that time, here's a little personal story, because I worked Katrina, but I was working for the state of Florida. And during Katrina, I started grad school in emergency management at Florida State. So I was working Katrina during the day. I was going to school at night. And in 2006, you published this piece that was my first exposure to your work called The Red Pill. And we're going to claim this as the emergency management red pill. It has nothing to do with the alt-right kind of red pilling, but you do reference the movie The Matrix in it. And I'm just going to quote from this because this really galvanized me. One of the things you said in there was, you said, taking the red pill means recognizing that virtually nothing has been done since 9/11 to make the nation safer. Indeed, the opposite is the case. Together with the debacle that is Iraq, post-September 11, policies and plans have made the nation more vulnerable to natural disasters and future terrorist attacks. And that was like this stunning statement to me when I read it. Why do you think the post-9/11 policies were sort of so bad for the field of emergency management?
Well, where to start? The field had been really becoming professionalized prior to 9/11. It was a field that was evidence-based. It was a field that emphasized collaboration between government and civil society. It was a field where people were receiving certifications for their expertise, where educational opportunities were blooming, and where the idea of all hazards planning had been brought to the fore. In other words, you don't prepare for hazard X, Y, or Z. You develop capacities and capabilities that enable you to be flexible in the face of different hazards. After 9/11, there was a 180-degree change where everything was about terrorism, where traditional emergency management disciplines, unfortunately, were disrespected, where instead of a collaborative approach, there was a command and control approach being advocated instead of seeing local communities and civil society as being a part of emergency management. So-called quote-unquote civilians were seen as part of the problem. You saw a resurgence of myths about how the public behaves in disasters, myths about panic, about looting, about antisocial behavior, myths that had been debunked 50 years before, coming again to the fore. Then there were efforts like the development of, the National Response Plan had already existed, right? But there had to be a new plan brought in, not using knowledge from the emergency management community, but using contractors like the RAND Corporation to develop plans that then turned out to be suboptimal and resisted. And, you mentioned this piece that I did called The Red Pill, but actually a lot of that thinking on my part I had developed before Katrina ever happened. And I presented a paper in Japan in January of 2005 where I laid out some of these ideas.
I think in another...
And where I criticized the direction in which I saw things going. And it came as quite a shock to the members of the Japanese research and emergency management community that were in the audience. But to the Americans that were there, it made a lot of sense. So that was like January of that same year. So these criticisms had already been bubbling up. I wasn't the only one who was talking about them. Lots of other people were as well.
And in some other of your writings, you refer to this as the 9/12 syndrome, which I think is very powerful, and you define it as it included a myopic focus on terrorism as the only physical threat of any significance to the nation, and it was such a shocking event that you're right, and I've forgotten about the National Response Plan and the DHS, the creation of DHS. It was like we were all in such shock that it was just change the system, change everything, and probably not a lot of forethought into, okay, why are we doing this? Let's build upon what, the evidence base and good practices we already have.
Let me, and that quote is from your congressional testimony, and we were talking just before the show that it is our favorite congressional testimony of all time. We're going to tweet it out. People should read it. We would like you to autograph it. It really is. It's like the best 10 typewritten pages of emergency management sociology ever.
And in fact, I thought, I didn't see the date on it when I started reading it, and I was thinking, oh, this is recent. This is like probably done last month, maybe.
Right.
And it was done in 2007,
which is my, because right after that we had the Obama election, the Fugate time at FEMA. That testimony, I remember it talking about it. I remember it was all over Florida. People, do you think it did any good, that round of testimony post Katrina?
Well, I just want to add here that I never got to actually give the testimony because in the hearing went in a different direction, talking about the National Guard resources and capabilities that were so badly strained in Katrina because of the wars that we were in and so forth. So that was only a submitted testimony. But these ideas that were in the testimony were things that the disaster research community and emergency management community had been talking about for years.
Let's rewind the clock even further and go back to 1997, 99, when our hero, James Lee Witt, just to make him the hero of this
old
album,
Blue Eyes himself,
introduced Project Impact. And I know you were involved in the kind of the evaluation of that later on, but the idea of Project Impact was really similar to this idea of resilience, which people think of as like a 2010 buzzword, but was that baked into Project Impact? Can you tell us a little bit about what it was and what good it did for the emergency management community?
Well, as you said, Project Impact was a 1990s program that was very forward-thinking, that focused on working with local communities to encourage them to do a number of things, such as hazard assessment, physical mitigation planning, what would they do in terms of land use and other approaches to reduce hazards. Another really important part was the development of community partnerships between local government, local businesses, the nonprofit sector, etc., and public education. And as you said, when I was at the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware at that time, we were asked to be the evaluators of the program. So we looked at not only the pilot stage of the program, but also the implementation stage as project impact widened out to more than 250 communities around the country. So we did a lot of field work, a lot of interviews. We produced a lot of reports on project impact, which are still available on the Disaster Research Center website. We were really trying to get a handle on what made these projects work. Toward the end of the activity, the research activity that we did, which took place over a 5-6 year period, we looked at project impact communities as compared to non-project impact communities that were similar to them to find out. So we went out to these communities that didn't get any money to find out whether similar things were happening. Were partnerships being developed? Was public education on hazards being emphasized? And we found that there were really differences, that project impact was having an impact. And when the Bush administration came in in 2001 after the 2000 election, one of the first things that was done was to discontinue the program on the grounds that it wasn't effective. Well,
what? And I remember this, and tell me about this, because I've been curious about this for years, honestly. Because when I was in grad school, I read about Project Impact. I was kind of amazed by it, and it was like those reports still are on the Delaware website, but it was like it was disappearing, like it was vanishing before my eyes when I was trying to read about it. How could you kill such an evidence-based programs? Because all the reports I read from you guys, and even the studies on mitigation that people have done since then, this is exactly what emergency management should be doing.
Sure. These concepts are now coming back under the rubric of resilience, which I find to be highly ironic. But my own sense, and I think this is an opinion that's shared throughout the research and practice community, is that Project Impact was too closely associated with James Lee Witt and with the Clinton administration. And, as good as a program is, if it becomes too associated with one particular person, party, or administration, it's likely to be killed. And of course, you know as well as I do that the irony is that at exactly the same time in early 2001 that Project Impact was eliminated, the Nisqually earthquake happened in Seattle, and that was a Project Impact community, and many people, emergency management experts and other commentators, said that Project Impact had really helped in terms of that particular earthquake, but it was exactly the same time.
And I think that, possibly feeds into one of your recommendations in the testimony you mentioned, which was to explore organizational arrangements and authorities that depoliticize high leadership positions within FEMA, DHS, and other crisis-relevant organizations. And that was to get to this, right? So that
yes.
Some of these great programs won't be killed when the next administration comes in.
Yes, exactly.
And so that was, here's me. I'm always trying to find the glass half full side of the story, because I really read this and it seemed like emergency management reached this high water mark and then it was sort of shattered after 9/11. And then, has it been gradually rebuilt? I mean, we did have the updates to the Stafford Act. We had making sure that the FEMA head had certain emergency management qualifications.
Remember, Bush in his signing statement crossed that out because he said that was interfering with the executive branch ability to make appointments.
Wait, seriously? Because that is totally new information to me. I thought that was reported that they had to do that now. The FEMA rep had to be an emergency manager. No?
You're talking about the post-Katrina emergency management PCAMERA.
The one unpronounceable acronym in emergency management.
Yes.
He crossed it out. That sly dog.
If you take a look, Bush opposed that in his signing statement. But that didn't mean that part of the act didn't have an impact. Because what we're seeing now in the person of people like Brock Long are really, really experienced and qualified people, and I hope that continues. The leadership of FEMA should not be a place where a big-time contributor to whatever party ends up as a political appointee.
Yeah, especially because most emergency managers couldn't afford to be big-time contributors. It pretty much disqualifies us right out of the gate, I think.
Very true.
No, I hear you. And, I think, as I said, in Brock, you see people who, just like James Lee, who had experience at the state level, who had a lot of experience in terms of, dealing with actual disasters, actual federal declarations. We'll leave a conversation on Puerto Rico out of this unless you want to go there. But
we want to go there.
We are seeing that expertise is being recognized, and that's all to the good.
Well, I guess let's poke at that a little bit and look at 2017. Now that the dust is settled a little bit, I mean, the new study about Puerto Rico mortality was just released, but
yes.
FEMA has done a really intensive after action process. The National Emergency Management Association has done an intensive after action process. I assume you've been keeping up to date on that. Based on your work on risk and resilience and the way society constructs these risks, what are the major lessons for you on the 2017 storm impacts?
Well, I think probably the first thing that strikes me is that our society has to get used to the fact that we can see multiple very serious and near catastrophic events coming one after the other. And I question, number one, what the capacity is for dealing with sequential events on the scale that we saw in Harvey, Irma, and Maria. And I also, quite frankly, saw with what happened in Puerto Rico the same sort of a pattern that we saw in Katrina, where a majority, minority, in this case a territory rather than a city or a metropolitan area, was overlooked in the aftermath of a catastrophic disaster. And here now we see, as researchers had always expected, that there were massively more people killed and also injured and traumatized than was ever claimed. So I think this brings a social vulnerability and social justice lens to the fore in the same way that Katrina did.
Does that mean that nothing's changed?
No, I think that what has changed is the frequency and the scale of the sorts of events that now we're going to begin to see.
Yeah.
And I know that, FEMA is trying to do, strategic planning and forward thinking in terms of what's coming down in the future, and I've played a role in some of that in a very small way. But I still don't think that the country and the agencies are ready for the new normal.
Yeah.
We always say in the disaster field that there is a tendency to try to solve the problems that were presented by the last disaster, or maybe the typical disaster. We're in a different disaster regime right now, and I'm not really sure that there is a deep enough appreciation of that. We saw it last year, and we're going to see it again.
One thing I really appreciated about Barack Long is that he, following some of these major disasters last year, got in front and said, FEMA cannot do it all. We can't do it all ourselves. We need help. And it was kind of humble in his approach of, we're not designed to do this all by ourselves. We need help from other federal agencies, from states, from local agencies, from the public. And it was an acknowledgement of not only a whole community approach to disaster preparedness and responses needed, but also an acknowledgement of this new normal of storms are getting bigger, more frequent, and happening simultaneously across the country.
And I guess I want to play a little counterpoint. Let's play Crossfire, which is my worry about it, right, is, one of the things he said, and this is in the FEMA strategic plan, is, let's imbue a new culture of preparedness, which local communities, individuals, and households should take on some of the burden of the preparedness, which I think sounds actually great from an emergency management point of view. My worry, though, is something like this, and this is in Dr. Tierney in your book. Poor people, members of minority and ethnic groups, female-headed households, and other vulnerable populations often lack the means to take protective action in the face of hazards and disasters, yet are also disproportionately exposed to those risks. So I guess my worry is if FEMA pulls back, and maybe they need to, I'm not, who steps in to help those who are most vulnerable? And I guess I'm going to put, since you're the guest, Dr. Tierney, let me put that one to you. How does society change this, right? How does society help those people who are disproportionately at risk?
Well, I don't think it does it by going about things the way it has done, by contracting out to private contractors to run programs like the Road Home program after Katrina. I think that, let's look at this in the larger context. We've been told for the last 30, 40 years that government is bad and that government doesn't know how to do anything, right? Things should be privatized, and let's get government out of the business of performing government functions. This is not a good direction to go in when we're talking about disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Government has a fundamental responsibility in this area to not only protect life and health and property, but also to ensure that people are treated equitably and are responded to in ways that respect their needs and their dignity. This worries me a whole lot, that the great divide that we see in our society now, whether it's talking about income or wealth or privilege privileges or whatever is going to translate into disadvantage in disaster situations. And we know it. We're seeing it. And we have to do something about it.
And I think to that point, and to Brock Long's defense in FEMA isn't designed to do that, right? That requires a really whole society approach. How can emergency managers influence that in their communities? Do you know what I mean? I mean, if we are designed to be this kind of really small, wind up holding the bag, clean up the mess thing, how do we influence the rest of society to take these things seriously?
Well, first of all, FEMA is the federal government. We also have state responsibilities and local government responsibilities. But we also know that disasters don't figure high on the priority of local governments and, generally speaking, state governments either. So I would like to see the federal system more energized to deal with hazards and disasters, not just FEMA or DHS, but state and local governments as well. Yes, absolutely. The whole community approach is the way to go. There need to be collaborations between governmental agencies, the private sector, nonprofits, and civil society more generally. But the government at all levels cannot abrogate that responsibility and put that back on civil society institutions and on vulnerable groups as we ask vulnerable people who are struggling every day to become disaster resilient. How can they do that? How can they do that? So let's just really take a look at some of this whole community rhetoric and FEMA can't do everything rhetoric. Yes, we know that these things are true, but we have to be able to do something to level the playing field in terms of the ability of the most vulnerable people to be able to cope with and survive and thrive after disasters. This is our challenge.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the point of, infusing emergency management principles into non-emergency management fields, so
Absolutely.
that the banking sector isn't making, crazy loans, where the people can't refinance. So the agriculture is being more resilient in the crops that they're promoting. Things like, all those little changes in the preparedness in between disasters that help us not have such impactful disasters when they do occur.
Yeah, and I think your book actually does a great job, and I'm looking forward to the 2019 book since it'll go more into this, especially of talking about the nature of resilience, right? Because this idea has been around for so long, and it keeps popping up, right? It was disaster-resistant communities, it's popping up as resilience, and your work is really grounding it, I think, and giving it much more of a sense of like tangible nature. Like I can really see why it's going to keep people from dying now after this conversation.
Oh my goodness. Man, that's what we're all looking for, right?
Well, I don't know there's nothing we can do to top that. Emergency managers trying to keep people from dying.
That's right.
Every day. Working
Just
minimum wage.
I mean, that the situation in Puerto Rico where really, for the first time that I'm aware of, there has been an emphasis in research, and very, very good research, on not only the immediate deaths that occur in disaster, you drown, a building falls on you, but looking at the follow-on implications. What happens when a support system, whether it's the medical system, the mental health system, community systems, are compromised when they fail? What happens to people on dialysis, on oxygen, on medications that they can't get. These deaths are also attributable to disaster.
And I think as emergency managers, we spend a lot of time on response. I know there's a national recovery framework. We're working on that. I think we really have to think more holistically about sticking there throughout the event until we really get to normalcy, which in a lot of cases takes years or decades in some instances.
Well, you guys know about, the 2003 blackout and what happened in New York City, or Sandy and what happened with people who needed medical supports, elderly people living in high-rise buildings who were isolated and stranded. These are the problems that we have to deal with. Not only the immediate deaths and injuries, but also the follow-on, the sequelae of disaster.
Oh,
this is our challenge.
Latin alert.
That's right.
Uh-oh.
We got to get our daughters down here who are, third grade Latin.
Absolutely. Totally scholars of all the Romance languages here.
Yeah.
Go to the Google.
That's right.
Sequelae. See, my Catholic school education is coming out.
That's great.
I actually took Latin in high school, but I can't remember any of it except I basically have E pluribus unum, and that's actually it. Carpe diem.
I feel like
not even all Gaul is divided into 3 parts.
I read that one time, but I rapidly forgot it. If there's a comic book.
Also, your internet password here is like some weird Latin phrase. I have to ask you to respell it every time I come. It's very annoying.
You know what we should do? Give out my internet password on the podcast.
You need to get more lowbrow
internet
passwords. Fugate,
all right.
Like mine. Mine's just Fugate.
That's
my internet password.
If you're listening, there's so much we could do with that, but we're gonna have to leave why we choose our internet passwords for another time, because it may be time for our lightning round.
Our famous lightning round. Okay, are you ready?
We haven't actually briefed you on this. Here's what our lightning round is. We're going to ask you 10 questions, and you have to answer them in 2 or 3 seconds each.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, question number 1. What is your favorite hazard?
Earthquakes.
Oh,
that's a good one.
Yeah, okay. Second, who's your favorite disaster sociologist? Don't say yourself.
Henry Corintelli.
Oh,
good
classic
one.
answer.
Classic,
I should have said don't say Corintelli, but okay.
You start running out of them after
I know, right?
Number 3.
He was my advisor, I have to say that.
Oh,
even
really?
from the grave, he's going to come back on me.
So number 3, what hazard makes you the most nervous? So not necessarily what's your favorite hazard. What makes you the most nervous?
Climate change.
Yeah, that's going to get us. What's the first disaster that you remember? Just you personally.
Hurricane Diane.
Oh, wow. When was that?
Sometime in the 1950s.
Oh, that's right.
In what area of the country?
Well, it affected a lot of the East Coast. I was born in Ohio, but we had some of the aftermath.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, how about if I say the 1970 the Xenia tornado? That makes me sound younger. That was the first disaster I studied.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, that was
actually our next question is, what's the first major disaster that you worked or studied? So what was this? A tornado?
Xenia, Xenia, Ohio tornado.
And were you studying that as part of the Disaster Research Center, sort of after
I was,
disaster
yes.
studies? How cool
at Ohio State.
To have been a part of that. Oh,
yeah.
Wow. All right. I forget whose turn this is mine. Okay. What's the hardest thing about studying disasters? What's the thing that makes it the most difficult?
Access to data.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right. We never give any of that stuff out. No matter who asks us, we're never going to tell you.
Well, is that because the data is hard to get to? People don't want to share it, or post-disaster, there's just not a lot of data collecting going on?
Could I say something about that?
Yes,
sure.
Because I think it's important. As disaster researchers at DRC at Ohio State, we were trained to get into disaster settings while disasters were happening. And we were trained in ways to do that. And we were very successful. A lot of things changed after 9/11 in terms of the way that researchers reviewed, although I have to say that we were very successful in doing research on 9/11. But after that, there were a lot of difficulties. But there's a real sort of a skill that people need to know in order to be able to get into those settings and observe what's going on. And then, it's very, very difficult to get data out of agencies such as FEMA, for example.
Not to name any names.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, just,
But, so getting access to the right data in a timely fashion that's needed for research purposes is a huge challenge.
Yeah, people are really guarded with data, and I think this also plays into the politics of disasters and how, the blame game following disasters, people start getting even more closed off.
Maybe I should give everybody my internet password, and then my data will be open and accessible to everyone.
Open source, come on, man.
All right.
But, just as an aside here, guys, and I know we've gone on too long, I was directing a big study for the preparedness directorate at FEMA on return on investment for community preparedness activities. And we wanted some data from the mitigation directorate, some stuff related to flood insurance and payouts and all that for our study. We couldn't get it.
Oh, my goodness.
All right, let's keep trucking.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, guys.
No,
that was a great point.
That was good.
We could do a whole episode just on that. Number 7, what is your favorite disaster movie? This doesn't have to be a movie like Volcano or Independence Day.
Although it could be.
Or it could be those. It could be a movie that features a disaster, maybe.
Well, favorite, Contagion.
Oh, that's a good one. There we go.
I think maybe someone else said
any movie with Gwyneth Paltrow's exposed brain is a good movie.
That is a great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, they're all interesting for the disaster myths that come up in them. But that's Contagion was interesting.
Yeah, the problem I had with that movie was how they made the Minnesota Department of Health look like such idiots. You remember they were explaining to them how diseases
Thanks
spread.
A lot, CDC. We have no doctors on staff. All right,
listen. Just as an aside, there, a common theme in these disaster movies is government incompetence or perversity.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
That's a part of the whole picture.
Good point.
Is it fair? Maybe we'll never know. So I'm going to ask you this one. I'm going to see if you're going to answer it. I don't know. Who's your favorite FEMA director that you've worked with over your career?
I like Craig Fugate.
A
Oh,
Craig.
He's a tough one to beat.
That's right, man.
Tough one to beat.
He's our hero.
Okay.
No, I mean, he to me embodies what a director should have. And of course, I did like James Lee Witt when he was FEMA director. Yes.
This leads to the next question.
This is a great segue to number 9. Who would win in a cage fight, James Lee Witt or Craig Fugate?
Craig Fugate.
Oh, right off the bat. He has ninja skills we don't even know about. Okay. Can you just say why?
Yeah.
Why?
Quick.
He is quick on his feet.
That's
I would
right.
not despise.
But then again, we have to say today's James Lee Witt and today's Craig Fugate, or
I think
is
at the
this
time
like a
they were both
fantasy
FEMA
match?
directors. That's right. When they were both FEMA
When
directors.
they were both FEMA.
I think that would
their
be...
top physical.
Because you're definitely FEMA director at your physical...
Right, you're working out every
That's
day.
one of the
You've got so much
qualifications.
time.
Craig Fugate.
All right.
All right, good.
Oh, nice. Okay, number 10. What is your favorite item in your go bag? We're assuming that you have a go bag
Your
as a disaster researcher.
sociological go bag.
That's right.
My will.
Oh, that's actually really smart.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Spoken like a true disaster responder.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. No, I actually do have a go bag, and yeah.
Do you have a will in it? Like a paper?
Yes.
Okay.
That is something I do not have.
I got to up my game, man. I got to prepare for my death more effectively.
Well, what about your medical power of attorney, and all those other important documents?
That is very true.
Man, this show is heavy. We
Mitch
try
just started
for it
sweating.
not to be,
Heavy.
but- Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tierney, for being
this
on.
has been amazing.
KT, I'm going to call you KT because I hear that's your
Okay.
nickname from now on, and we're really
It
looking
is.
forward to Disaster's sociological aspects that'll be out next year.
Hey, listen, was this okay?
Yeah,
This is
was
great.
amazing.
This was extraordinary, actually. We covered, I feel like, the entire life cycle of emergency management.
Yeah, I wish we had another hour to talk to you, honestly. This is,
Maybe when the next book comes out, we'll have you back, and
That'd
we
be
can
great.
cover all this stuff.
You know, I would welcome that. You guys are so smart.
No, nobody's ever
I
told
can't
us that.
believe
Don't.
it.
You'll
That
give
is
us
the
swelled
first.
eggs.
Yeah.
I said swelled
You're
eggs.
like did I say that?
We're just going to play that
No,
on a
this
loop.
this has been terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you so
thank
much.
you. Keep doing God's work.
That's right. Dude, she's like an encyclopedia of
Yeah, that
emergency
was
management.
amazing. I do think we should play replace our theme song music with her just saying, "You guys are smart. You guys are smart. You guys are smart."
Yeah, maybe we'll add a little techno beat, like
Yeah, make it into a song.
No, that's nice.
Yeah, it was great. I keep coming back to, like, so much money goes into response and recovery, billions and billions, and that money needs to shift to preparedness, planning, training, exercise,
Mitigation.
right?
And I feel like also it's so cyclical. Like it's like we almost got there at the end of the 90s. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We're getting there with Hulk. I really think, in Brooklong, you still got time. You still got time to reach the pantheon, right? And I think this is the wave. This focus on mitigation, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Can we actually have the real conversation here?
Sure.
Which is, which Avenger do you think each of these FEMA directors that we're talking about is?
Yeah.
Can we just talk about that for a second?
Let's see. Brock Long, probably Iron Man.
You
right?
think he's
I
gonna
mean,
get Iron Man?
He's a pretty good looking
I
guy.
mean, he's suave. He's really suave. Does that mean can Craig Fugate be Captain America in that scenario?
Probably. Although James Lee Witt
does
is pretty
have the-
clean cut. Maybe Lee Witt is Captain America.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's see. Fugate's definitely not Black Panther.
Incredible Hulk?
Oh.
One time Fugate told me to be more aggressive.
Yeah, that's true. He values that.
So-
he does have that. He's got the scientist thing, and then he's got the.
He is
he's
pretty
pushing
calm.
for it. Maybe he's Doctor Strange.
I would hate to get on his bad side. Can you imagine rubbing him the wrong way, like in a meeting, and him just being like, "What did you say?"
That's true. Yeah, all respect, but you do not want to get on the man's bad side.
That's right.
Michael Brown, maybe Hawkeye in this scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are all the FEMA administrators we know.
And there are so many more. You can send them to us, and we'll add them to the team, because by the time we get to our FEMA Director's Infinity War, we're going to need like 43 more of them.
Who was before James Lee Witt? You know? I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't know. Boy, it doesn't really bode well, but we'll look it up and we'll get back to you. Don't forget to call us. Our number is 859-429-2731. People are calling us. They're telling us we have no episode 17. We're going to look into that. We were never that good at math.
Yeah, maybe it dropped off. I don't know.
I don't know.
Did we really not record this?
I think I know the answer to this, and we'll talk
okay.
about it next time.
Follow us on Twitter, Hazards Podcast.
We're on Instagram too, where all the kids are these days.
Yep.
And our next episode, actually, we already know what it is, and it's going to be really exciting. So we will talk to you guys again on 9/11 this year.
Another happy anniversary.
I know, right? We really, well, there's always Stafford Act Day.
That's true.
Sad. It spells sad.
Oh,
I know. We just
need more positivity in this industry. You guys are smart. You guys are smart. You guys are smart.